journey so far, especially with a focus on international sales. So maybe if we can look at Shannon, if you want to kick us off, how did you get started?
Yeah, no dramas. I mean, obviously we're in essence software as a sales in terms of virtual reality experiences that we're basically trying to license out to various VR arcades across the globe at the moment. So the way we got started was to really not start internationally, was to start very locally, is to basically start doing it ourselves, providing our own VR arcades first. And we actually started out by offering and using everyone else, all of our competition software as much as we possibly could. Offer that out to audiences, see what resonated with audiences, what they liked, what they didn't like, what worked, what didn't work, and where we basically could improve and do better. Because it was to our thought that it's already a reasonably busy market. So if we're going into that market, we need to make sure that what we can do is better than what's already out there.
Saxon, how did you start your journey?
Cool. So I guess in terms of like forming our company, I was originally in an IT job in government. I then studied at the AIE to learn game development because I was particularly keen to create an indie game startup studio. So back in 2020, I co-founded Kite Shield Interactive, where our primary goal is to create indie games and sell them like internationally on platforms such as Steam. And we've been quite successful with that. We now do side contracts and we've been successful with some grants like the Screen Australia grant for developing our game Mooncorp. So in terms of how we've been approaching marketing, it's very much internal first, with no funding, trying to create a brand, an image, set it up, and then as we've got funding coming in, how we're trying to spend that money for our best value.
Okay. So what have been some of the challenges in terms of getting your name out there when you first started marketing? Shannon, you want to kick us off?
Yeah, sure. Getting that initial foot in the door, basically. The worst thing in the world, obviously, is figuring out how you can make that cold call, how you can make that initial contact point. The end and perfect goal with this sort of stuff is you've got people coming to you, but that's never going to happen in the first instance. So it was around how do we build up our brand? How do we make ourselves aware? A lot of that was finding out where all these people talked, where are the forums, what are the Facebook groups, where are these people that we're trying to market to actually located, where do they live, and basically just making myself part of that community, making sure that I was actually giving more than I was asking. So talking to people about what was going on with their business, what's some of the ideas that we were having, what are some of the ways that we could help, and then building up that awareness and relationship, and then starting to have that discussion around, well, this is what we're doing. This is what we're planning to offer. This is what our product is going to look like. And this is how I think it actually could be helping you and your business and your model.
And Saxon, what about yourself?
Definitely shadowing some of the things that Shannon said as well, finding that community. One thing that I think even you've helped us with as well, with some of the marketing talks that we've gone to, is finding the different audiences for our business as well as our product. So currently we think we've done it quite well with our business. So finding those communities, being involved. As Shannon was saying, we're now getting to the size, and we've been around for long enough that we are starting to get those interactions where people are coming to us and we're having to keep up with that demand of contracts, new employees, things like that. We're still trying to figure out the best way to do it for our product. So for our game Mooncorp, we looked at what was cost effective for us marketing wise, and I think we've struggled a bit with what is the best use of our time and effort. So most of the people in our company are game developers, and we've had to do a lot of research into figuring out the best way for us to market from scratch, and that's been really eye-opening in exactly what a marketing firm or other people providing that service then have to offer. And we've found it's definitely useful to do it yourself internally if you think it's providing enough of an outcome, but it's definitely worth paying for people who know how to hit those right markets effectively and efficiently. So if we're paying for one of our staff to do the marketing, but they could also be working on our game, it's about whether they can provide the same value as we could to pay for it externally. So we did like a full year of marketing internally, and we were successful with that, but we think it would have been better spent developing the game, and particularly finding the right partners to do that was something that we really focused on, and the right communities.
You raised a really interesting point there about doing the marketing yourselves first and doing it internally. Do you think that the fact that you did do that actually gave you the experience to better brief a marketing agency? Very often we see when, depending on whatever business you're in, if you're the technical expert in your business and you hand it over to somebody else, it's very often you hand it over and you expect a result, but really you need to brief them incredibly well in order to get a good result. And the only way you can do that is if you've had a go yourself. What are your thoughts on that, Shannon?
Yeah, look, I think you're always the best seller of your own product. Especially in that first stage, you're the one that really knows it, and you're the one that's the most invested in making it happen. And look, it's really important as well that you screen any of these agencies that you use really well and make sure that you find them that have the passion and enthusiasm, because that's what people pick up on. If you truly believe in your product, if you think your product is amazing, you are going to have a passion and an enthusiasm that's going to flow over into your customers that's very hard to replicate from a marketing firm. So I suppose it depends on the nature and size of your audience as well. So for us, for example, in terms of the work we're doing, our market pool is very small. There's probably only anywhere from a few hundred to a few thousand of these arcades in the world, which is not a very big pool at all, as compared to if you're doing, just distributing a game on Steam, for example. So I can't afford for someone to get a few of those wrong. So for us, you've really got to weigh up that risk of if it's not done well, if it's not done right, if they're getting the message wrong, if they don't know the technical aspects, what is that risk for you? So that's why predominantly we've done nearly all of it ourselves in the particular business way we're doing it. But the other thing I will say as part of that is, I say that we do it ourselves, but a really big focus for me is creating and nurturing champions. And when I talk about champions, it's the concept of people that you have gotten on board within the community, within your market, that love you and love your product so much that they then spruik it on as well. They create great word of mouth. They basically speak to other people in that sector saying, have you tried this product? I use it. It's great. It's fantastic. And that's a really, really powerful tool. And that's something that we really actively try and make sure to create and engage as well.
Yeah. Just if I can pick up on a point, you've both talked about opportunity cost and the importance of understanding what that is in your business. How do you go about putting a value on that? At what point do you decide it's no longer worth me doing it myself, it's now time to bring somebody else in?
Or to bring in a very specialized skill set?
Yeah.
Because marketing nowadays, is such a complex area, from your SEO specialist to your content marketer. it's not the general marketing that it used to be 10, 15 years ago. So exactly, when do you reach that tipping point when, you do bring either one specialized skill in, or maybe you bring in somebody in-house that you're going to train up to do something?
Saxon, you're nodding your head. Do you want to go first?
That's tricky. We've found it particularly tricky. For us, it's depended a bit on where our business was at. So internally, we particularly looked for anyone internally who wanted to, give marketing a go, look at, running all of our social media sites, running that content. And we've had members be like, yes, I love being involved in some of those communities online. I love being part of that, and I would love to, do that for Kite Shield. So that's how we've initially started it internally. When we've gotten, or when we've received funding, allocating some of that towards a marketing budget and figuring out how to spend that effectively has been something that we're still looking into to figure out the best way to do it. Shannon's definitely right that you need, the right people, and whether that's, internal, external, or like general marketing skills. For us in the indie games industry, there are specific marketing companies that specialize in marketing indie games online and across international audiences. So for us, it would be a lot of work to replicate that internally. We could definitely do the English-speaking market, but sometimes the size and scale that they can do it, and with a message that they know their audience, the general community will receive really well. Those are some of the things that we've highly valued that we think we couldn't do internally and is worth paying for. So yeah, for us, it's just been about having the right marketing budget available, and then finding the right partner to work with. And as Shannon said before, going to the right communities to find those partners. So we went to the Game Developers Conference this year in America, where you can do all sorts of deals. Everyone from all over the world comes there, to try and connect and find those right communities. And that's where we found some really great marketing partners that we'd like to work with in the future.
Just picking up on something new. Carry on.
Oh, sorry. I was just going to say, I think when talking about that, the important thing you talked about is when you said opportunity cost. And it is really saying, what is the cost of me doing this now as opposed to the cost if I don't do it now? But I think there's two aspects of that. One is, do you actually have the cash to do otherwise? You need to ask that very practical question right off the bat. Can I actually afford to pay for someone else to do this right now? Because a lot of the time with smaller indie companies, that's the main factor that comes into play. If you just don't have that cash, then that gets answered for you really quickly. But the other thing is I suppose a case of, this one's been a bit easier for us because we, very different from a lot of indie companies, we purposefully came into this very, very clear split of allocation. And we were quite lucky that I came into the role with a long history of sort of executive management, marketing, all that sort of thing. So that was always my role here. We sort of understood that was a really massive part of doing this type of business. Developing the product is, as I said, developing the product is only 30% of it. The other 70% of it is making sure that people are going to buy that product. So, but in terms of moving forward, I suppose the point for me is whenever we reach sustainable enough numbers that we have comfortable cash flow. Once we have comfortable cash flow, that's when I basically want to be spending my time pulling back and going into quality management, quality assurance, building more product, and paying someone to do the bringing in, because at that point, I want it to be to the stage where we're not having to go to people anymore. We've just got people coming to us. So that's the point, I think, for us, where that opportunity cost would split over. So, but opportunity cost comes into play in terms of other work as well. So similar to what Saxon was talking about before, and with every sort of small indie company, whatever it might be, it's the opportunity cost sometimes for us is, do we take on that extra contract? that contract that's not core work, but that's going to pay us a little bit of money to get it across the line. That's actually usually the tricky question for us in terms of opportunity cost. How much time will it take us doing this contract that will not be bringing out new products, expanding our products, making our products better, versus the value and the cash we're going to get? That's usually one that we have to do quite a lot of, spreadsheets and back of the book calculations to figure out how long it's going to take us offline and how far behind that'll put us.
Just picking up on that, Sean, we had a little bit of a chat about this before. So, I mean, most startups, whatever industry you're in, have to look at other work to sort of keep the doors open in the first couple of years. How do you do that while maintaining the momentum in your core business and driving that marketing so you're attracting customers to your core business? What are some of the tricks that you've learned over the years to deal with that?
For us, a really big one is making sure you are multitasking, make sure things don't get dropped or put on the back burner. So, for example, if you've got to pick up a contractor to pay the bills, as you do, you make sure you are still allocating time, allocating a specific day, whatever it may be, the core business is still pushing forward. So it may be that you need to slow it down. It may be that it doesn't get you a full-time week anymore, but you need to make sure that it's not a case of it just gets dropped completely. So especially when you're talking about development and code or whatever it is, if you just drop it completely for 3-4 months, by the time you come back, it's going to take you so long to get back in that groove. Making sure that no matter what extra stuff you do, what extra stuff you pick up, there's still some level of momentum, there's still some level of oversight, there's still some level of core business going forward. And honestly, when it comes to a small business, that is accepting that you might end up having to do more hours for that period or extra days or whatever it might be. Like, that is just the simple nature of it. I know no one likes the concept of crunch, but when push comes to shove and it's your business on the line, that's sometimes just what you have to do.
Okay. How have you found that, Saxon, balancing, cash flow and different projects and where things are going? How have you guys handled it?
It's quite difficult. It's something that you have to get working right, and that your team has to be quite on board with as well. Even just talking about what some of what Shannon was saying as well, is also working to your strengths as well. So if Shannon's already got experience in marketing, apply it straight away. Like, that's something that we don't have. We have to start from scratch, learn about it, look at how we can implement it, and then go from there. But we've got experience in other things. Both of like my co-founder and I have quite a lot of experience, with grants from our previous work. So we've been quite successful with a few grants to try and bring in that cash flow, which we can then, allocate to projects. So I think we've gotten quite good at pitching for grants and certain projects. And because we're in that indie development startup phase, it can be tricky. It can be tricky to keep the cash flow going and finding something that fits with the team. So exactly as Shannon was saying, is this contract a good fit for the team? Are we actually going to get, money or revenue coming through that will keep the team going on other projects, or is it actually going to keep them occupied? The money's just going to go onto the project, and then we're not going to get a company benefit out of it. So definitely assessing those to see what would be a good fit for the company and the people in your team, and then making sure you keep them well informed of what's happening, because sometimes the cash flow stops. You let people know as early as possible if that happens, and what they can do, and what the whole company can do, and what I can do to keep that cash flow going, whether that's applying for grants, doing more marketing, doing more contracting, and figuring out how you keep the business running.
So that's probably a really good segue into a conversation about pricing. So pricing is both a marketing tool, but really it comes down to cash flow. And how do you price your products? How do you make sure that you're demonstrating value to your customers, but actually that you're generating enough money to feed yourselves? What has been your approach to how you price your products, Shannon?
Yeah, look, I mean, Oh, there. Good job, Isaac. Okay. So I think for us, it really was an initial case of a lot of research into the market because it was a very existing entrenched market. There's only a small number of players and there are very set fees involved. So for us, as I mentioned earlier, we went out and actually licensed a lot of products from other players around the world. We actually saw what they were charging, saw how they were pricing. I created so many spreadsheets everywhere, basically listing what are all the different competitions, name, what is their offering, how long does their offering last, what are they charging, what does that actually look like? And I basically did a whole bunch of things like, averaging those different prices together. What does it actually look like? Because we're targeting, small mum and dad sort of businesses a lot of the time. You can't come in there way too high into that existing market because no one will just touch you, basically, no matter how good your product is, if it's ridiculously above these particular rates, because we're going into a market where everyone's charging a certain price. So the two main options that we actually looked at and had to discuss was, do we go with a flat fee or do we go with a percentage-based fee? So and those are the two main ways that people were doing it. They were saying we charge X amount per play, or we charge X percentage of what you charge to play. So ultimately, we decided to go with a percentage-based model, and part of the reason for that was the fact that we really recognized that we needed to hit a very broad international market. So it was quite different from, traditional games, for example, where it's all about hitting the US. Like that's the vast majority. We were looking at VR arcades where there's a significant portion of these in Europe, for example. There's quite a lot in the Middle East. There's a lot of places all over the place, and the way people charge is extraordinarily different everywhere. Some of them charged on a per session basis, and some of them charged on a per time basis. Some of them charged, very different amounts because they were from different types of countries where there was different expectations on how much people pay for their entertainment. So we basically said, if we want to get in there in any sort of realistic way, we have to do that on a percentage basis. And so that's how we approached it, and that's how we've gone ahead.
Excellent.
That experience of so many different countries and different ways of pricing their products. How have you found that there is a cultural element to value and how people perceive it? And have you had to do different things depending on the market?
Yes, absolutely. So, for example, we're currently in various processes of installation at about 67 sites across 15 countries, and it's really different. So, for example, we've really found in the Middle East, for example, they are all around charging for your time. And they charge at very different times. So basically, it's a case of if you want to come to our arcade centre, entertainment centre, whatever it might be, you will get charged in 15-minute increments. And if you don't get your game done or whatever it might be, then you pay for an extra 15 minutes or you leave. And that was an extremely different mindset from other places, for example, like in Australia and the US, where you pay for the game or the escape room. Like if you pay for a VR escape room, predominantly you get to play the whole thing through and you get it done. So that was a very different approach that we just weren't used to. Some other stuff, for example, was there are some places that had different expectations around the immersion levels. Some people really didn't care if you were all wide up in VR and you just had to stand around and teleport, whereas for others it was all about you had to be able to free roam, and in other places it was all around what they call 4D, and you had to have wind-blowing machines and vibrating floors and all that sort of stuff. So it was extraordinarily interesting to see all those different ones. The biggest market, to be honest, that we've had real difficulty getting into and haven't yet has been the Asian market, and that is a completely different kettle of fish.
Did you actually travel overseas and experience it? How did you do your market research?
Talking to a lot of people, a lot of late nights in different time zones, basically talking to all these different providers, getting all these Facebook groups, seeing the way they talked back and forth constantly, watching a lot of videos. Like everyone puts all their videos up on TikTok and Instagram and stuff, for example, around how they do things at their venue, the way that people market their experiences for example, on TikTok, actually gives you a lot of insight culturally into what their expectations are for their product and for their services. So all of that sort of stuff. Like I would still really like to and hope to get out there at some stage and visit a lot of these places. But at this stage, that's a lot of money and time and resources that we just don't have to spare. So
just a follow-on question, and this applies to you as well, Saxon, but do you decide on your first market based on the dollar value or on the ease of access?
That can be a bit tricky. It depends what your priorities are. So when we're looking at creating a new IP or a product for indie game development, we have to make sure that the audience size and the product cost will actually pay for development. So one example that I always like using in my team is that my team know I'm obsessed about mech games, robot fighting games. I absolutely love them, but they're a small niche audience, and they will 100% buy your game, but there's only so many people in that audience. So if you were going to make a mech or robot fighting game, it would have to probably be a short development time, hit the key things that they would be after, and make sure that you can fund that project with that audience in mind. So if that's something that your team can do, that you can pull off, then that's a very good idea. But if your team is much larger, or you need more funding coming in to support the team or whatever else you're planning for your business, you need to make sure that your product has the right size and audience to be able to pull that off, especially if you're looking for funding, grants, publishers, or the sales revenue after it's released. You have to make sure that you don't make a mistake there.
What about you, Shannon? I mean, you're a slightly different play.
Yeah, so look, it's interesting. There was a theory and a reality on how we were going to approach that, and the theory was that we wanted to start very small scale locally first for a lot of reasons. It was just going to be easier for time zones, for speed of communication, for understanding the cultural requirements, even the ability to go up and visit them and stuff like that. And that worked perfectly for the first one, because the first site we did was actually up in Dubbo, New South Wales, and that was a very controlled site where we went up, did the installs for them, went to the software, that was all fine. But then what happened, and I don't know how, but for some reason, a whole bunch of international people found us very quickly. And number one site was Dubbo, number two was Canada, number three was US, number four was Spain. And all of a sudden it was like, okay. And so that was a very rapid requirement to shift and divert in terms of how we're going to do things and what we're going to offer and how we're going to keep up with time zones and communication with all these people. So there was a theory and then there was a reality.
Which is always the case in business, right?
And Saxon, theory and reality, what has been your experience?
Oh, much the same, to be honest. So for our game Mooncorp, it's split across two genres. So like Shannon was saying before, first thing you do is research as much as you can, figure out what you can find, and our game is a genre merge of tower defense, so a strategy game, and then running your own business, or a management game, or a tycoon game. So we did a whole lot of research about what kind of markets and what kind of audience look at those genres, the size of them, and then what kind of sales and things we can get from that. And then when we launched our game trailer, you can see here, and when we launched our Steam demo, it was then very interesting to see who actually turned up to download the demo online, play it, and then also do videos as well. So there were a few in America, some in the UK. There's a large following in Japan with one of the streamers trying out the game. So that was a huge thing for us. It's like we need to localize it to Japanese, because the streamer was going through reading all the English and then translating it to Japanese as he was playing. So that's that was definitely a surprise for us. So do as much research as you can, and then when things like that happen, adapt, add them to your plans. And as Shannon was saying before, if you've got those people that really do like your brand and your product, like engage with them and support them as much as possible, because we could try and do Japanese marketing internally on a shoestring budget, or we could make one supporter very happy with early access and keys and things like that, and then it can happen organically.
So just on that note, how important is understanding cultural differences, whether it be the language or whether it be the way that things are presented? Does that have an impact on either of your products?
Yeah, look, it can be really simple things sometimes, and I think you've really got to step back and think about sometimes the things you're saying and how it can be perceived and the things you're doing. And a really good example is we've all got our nicknames in gaming, right? And ever since I was a kid, my nickname had always been Prophet. And that was just what it was. My nickname was Prophet. But all of a sudden, I'm dealing with customers in the Middle East. Now, having a Discord nickname of the Prophet is not a good idea. So it was, again, sometimes it is just funny, these very little things, thinking about how they could be come across and how that might work. So the other thing as well is just having an understanding around culture. In some places are more comfortable with working around the clock and some aren't. In some areas it's seen as rude if you're trying to contact people out of hours, for example, or really trying to hit them up, at all hours a day with emails. Some people some countries prefer you to be really respectful around the concept of business hours and working with them. So yeah, there can be really little things sometimes that you do need to think about. And look, another thing on that, I just want to mention, it's part of that thing I think you mentioned before around your pricing strategy, is we're always thinking about targeting customers for life. So because of the nature of a business and how that works, is that we get customers onboarded basically to our systems. Once we've got that, and once they've got buy-in, basically every new experience we bring out, every new game, every new education, whatever it might be, they're going to probably already pick up because we've got that relationship with them. So everything we're doing is targeting the long-term growth. We're not about, there's some places that'll go out there and they'll charge a massive amount up front. They'll charge massive monthly fees because they want to try and get their money back as quick as they can to justify their costs. And that's not the route we're going. We are thinking of this as a very long-term strategy. We're thinking of this as building relationships with these people. And if we do that right and set it at price points that work for everyone in the long term, that's going to be a much better solution for us.
Absolutely.
Do either of you ever use pricing strategies where you use loss leaders, or you use discounting, or anything like that, where you get somebody to get a foot in the door so that you can build that relationship with them over time?
Every single time.
Yeah, discounting in particular on Steam is very, very big. It's hitting the right, your right audience for those discounts as well. So on Steam, you usually end up having like an on-release discount. So if it's within the first week or the first day, it's buy it quickly, it's 10% off, and then it's going to go to its full price. So you get people that are on the ball, keen on your game. They feel like they've got value for money with the first discount. Afterwards, they play it, they tell their friends about it, and their friends love buying games that their friends recommend, and they'll just buy anything. So they're happy to pay full price, they'll go for it. Some will look at that and go, oh, full price isn't for me, but I will wishlist it, I might buy it later. And then you end up with the big Steam summer sales and festivals across all the online platforms, and that's where you can get 50% discounts, sometimes more than that, sometimes 80% discounts. And then people have a whole range of items on their wish list, and they'll go, yep, that's value for fun. That's value for money for me, to be able to play, that game at that price. So definitely hitting all of those, right members of your target audience in that time with those types of discounts is that's what we're looking at in particular.
So you mentioned some key things there. You mentioned timing and follow up, and so what we're talking about here is marketing detail and consistency and having almost a throughput of tasks. Simply having a discount is only part of the equation. How do you manage your workflow so that an opportunity actually gets follow through all the way through, and that you don't land up squandering your effort in one area because the workflow doesn't support it?
Fix it where you can. It's a very tricky one. It's quite task specific to try and figure out where those opportunities are and how to take advantage of them. We always look for those opportunities wherever we can, whether it's applying for grants within a specific time period so that we can get funding for marketing and things like that. Sometimes it's even just the time of the year for when things will be released. So release window is a very big thing for games. So we could say, oh, well, we're going to release in, what's the date coming up? 1st of September. So 1st of September is Bethesda's biggest game, Starfield, their largest game in 25 years. It doesn't matter what marketing you do. If you release on the same day as that game, your game's not going to get attention. And then watching that with
let's
all the
not
follow-on
forget Baldur's Gate 3 in a month from now as well, mate. So you don't release anything in the next 3 months, I think you'd be mad.
And why did Baldur's Gate 3 move their release date? Because Starfield announced their release date, and then some other poor game at the end moved their date because Baldur's Gate moved their date. Like, it's a massive chain reaction. So making sure that you fit in the right place on release is a big thing.
Yeah, that's a really good point, is actually knowing what else is out there in your environment, whether it's your competitor or just other players in the space. It has a real impact on your marketing. And so much of marketing is not the creative bit, it's the detail. It's the detail of the timing and the putting it in a calendar and making sure that things happen. Shannon, you talked about the lifetime value of your customer. So once you've got them through, how do you support that lifetime value through detail? What marketing things do you put in place to keep making sure they keep coming back?
Yeah, so a big part of that is making sure you've got clearly communicated and transparent roadmaps, with your customer base, making sure you've got processes to keep them in the loop, basically feel like they're part of that family, whether or not that's, regular newsletters that are going out, whether or not you're putting out blasts on your Discord groups, talking to them about, what are their needs, is there changing needs they've got, is there something new we need to be focusing on? The other thing is, part of all of our systems is that we build analytics into the nth degree. And I'm always looking at those stats, basically. How much has this site played our game in the last month? How long are those sessions taking? Is there any sort of trends I can see? And making sure to reach out to people early, but in a proactive way that's a positive way, not like giving me a call up and say, look, you're not playing our game enough, we're going to have to kick you out and get someone else. It's a case of, what's going on for you? Is there trends that we're not aware about? Has there been a COVID breakout where you're going on? Is there stuff we can do to help? Can we give you some free promo marketing materials? Can we give you some ideas, some advice? Trying to really be a part of that solution for them, and just be seen as the way I describe it is that we are there to help other people grow their business. And if we help them grow their business, then it becomes a positive thing back on us. We never try and make it about us. We try and make it about them, about the customer. And if the customer's successful, then we're successful.
That's part of creating value, isn't it? Yeah. It's and knowing who you're creating value for. Whether it's the end user, your customer and your end user might be two different people, especially in the instance where you're supporting another business. So is there anything that you have done to create value in other respects beyond, say, Saxon selling the game? Is there any other thing that you do that just is that unexpected bit of delight that you provide?
Interacting with the community is quite a big one. in terms of product as well, our composer Dan Poole, he's created like the soundtrack for our game. So being able to sell that alongside the game for people who like game soundtracks, as like another thing of value is quite good. But definitely interacting with your community, and as Shannon was saying, seeing what they want, and what their interests are as well. So for us, we've been designing how we go about that when our game launches, particularly around the form of community challenges. So is there a certain thing you can build in your office management that could outperform someone else? Can you complete a mission faster than someone else? Doing weekly, daily challenges, things like that. And then seeing what the community enjoys and what they don't enjoy, and then changing to adapt that. And there's always a lot of enthusiasm when you can get interaction like that with a developer and a customer.
Yeah. Can I ask a question on that? So obviously the brand that you both work under has value, because obviously you've both been in the market now for a while. One of the questions we often get asked is when you are launching a brand into a new market, firstly, how do you make sure you're not offending anybody by making sure that the brand is still relevant across all markets? And then how do you manage and market that brand within within those different verticals, or those different areas that you're selling into?
Yes, I mean, one thing I talked about earlier is when you're starting out, you're not necessarily selling the brand for the output that you're going to be creating in the long term. So what we did was basically sell the brand initially in terms of the relationship and the helpfulness of the people behind that brand. So we actually would go out there and we would try and say, this is who we are, this is what we're doing, this is some advice we can give you that's free, this is some referral points we can give you that have nothing to do with us, but they're just things that might help you out. Building up brand awareness from you as a company to start before you're actually trying to sell people products. So basically, if you're already known as those good guys, or that great guy, Shannon, I know him because he works over at Lightning Rock, he helped me out with XYZ. If you've already got that recognition of your company as helpful, as knowledgeable, as skilled, as having expertise, that's going to do a lot to actually help when you then start selling your product, because they're like, oh, wait, I already know you guys. You guys are already solid. You guys have already done X, Y, Z. If you're bringing out a product, then it's going to be great. So, you want to do that. It's doing prep work, basically, getting there and do as much as you can. And that's the way we sort of approached it.
Do you have a different approach between marketing your business and marketing your product? It's certainly an interesting, we see it a lot where the focus is always on marketing the product, but getting people to actually realize that marketing their expertise, their credentials, entering award programs, doing all of that stuff that demonstrates that you are a stable, sustainable business often gets left to the too hard, or we don't like talking about ourselves. How have you approached that, Saxon?
They're definitely different audiences. So that's something that we've definitely found. And I think our approach has been, just as Shannon was saying before, make sure that you're growing, the company and how you're going to be making your product first. We particularly focused on that when we were getting people to volunteer work for for our company through its startup phase. So if you are in terms of that's providing value for your employees, not even your customers yet. So we really focused on things like credits, portfolio, letters of recommendation, and in particular, what can several developers achieve as a whole over working on something alone in your spare time. So those are the things that we focused on in first developing Mooncorp, and then through that we've gained a bit of a reputation for Kite Shield in being approachable in that way. So we've had several years of students from AIE want to get involved, are happy to just be growing their portfolio and be involved in project work, and then when we do get things like contracts and money come through, we've then got a whole group of people that have already worked in a team that are more than happy to then get paid for contract work as well. So definitely growing it around that way. And what was the second part of the question again? Around
It's I think
around the target audiences for the businesses.
Yeah, that's right. It's
So,
also interesting. You mentioned, previously as well, that you've entered, you've applied for grants. So, a lot of that comes with marketing for the companies who are successful. Have you utilized that? Very often people are very bad at leveraging these opportunities. You actually have to ask for, somebody to promote it, or you have to really make use of it. Have you done any of that?
Yeah, so we spent a lot of time doing that to see how we were valuable as a company, and you have to approach the right people that are interested in that. So with our success for the Green Australia grant, we first identified that we were in a really good position. So we had 7 to 10 people, using their spare time to create our project. We had a demo on Steam. We'd done a little bit of marketing, and when the grant applications were announced, there was only 3 months to submit an application, and it was the first time the grant had ever been announced. So we saw that as an opportunity to go, there's no one else prepared for this grant, and they're looking to establish new companies and games for Australia. So we already had a product, we already had this trailer, and those were some of the requirements. So if those are some of the requirements for building a game, some people will be doing that from scratch, and for us, it was already done. So we spent 3 months developing a pitch video on why our business was the right one to pick compared to all the other games and projects that were out there. And some of the feedback we got after we were found successful for the grant was that there were 10 tower defense games that were submitted for the grant, and ours was picked because our team looked reliable, that it was a new startup team that could use the money effectively, and that we had a unique idea compared to a lot of the other designs. So we spent a lot of time figuring out where we sat in all of the other applicants as well. So some developers have already released games and we haven't released any. So first of all, we shouldn't be competing with anyone that has already released games. We should be looking at, we're the best group to pick because we haven't released a game, but we're organized to be. So we're a new startup, we're a new company, and embrace that. So what are the kinds of things that we've done because we don't have that experience? So what's the experience of the other team members? What are the things that we've done with the demo? And these are how we would like to release a game. So if they have certain demographics of areas they would like to pick, whether you're an established studio or a startup, we tried to be the best startup.
That's great. Shannon, on a slightly different angle, some of the other projects that you do, and we were certainly talking about one before we started this evening, how do you think being involved in projects that are not necessarily part of your core, but actually lead credibility to you as a company? Have you found any of that?
Oh, absolutely. And look, I mean, it's one of those evil SEO things that people never really want to talk about, but never underestimate the value of all your backlinks, all the various places that people are going to find your company name. whether it's being successful in a grant, whether or not it's the work you might have done on, a local campaign, a local game. For example, I got the Canberra Times out like 7-8 years ago to sort of interview the whole team when we had like a garage office, and that still floats out there, and we still get backlinks from that sometimes. Whether it's entering competitions, whether it's doing talks, everything you do that goes out there and goes out on the web all contributes to this sort of, meta understanding people have of your company as a whole. The professionality, the expertise, the experience, the knowledge that you are people that can actually get stuff done, that do interesting things, that have diverse experience. All of that comes into play. And we've had people coming to us wanting to license our VR escape rooms, but at the same time mentioning, oh, by the way, I saw that cool thing on your website that you did with that VR drone simulation. That looks really interesting. And it is always fascinating to never underestimate, like I said, all of that value that brings in terms of having a broad professional expertise within your company.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we might wrap up the formalities there and open up for questions. But look, Shannon and Saxon, I find you guys fascinating, and I could talk to you for hours. But let's see if we got any questions. Okay, so we've got a question here that says, how do I determine a good price point for an indie title on Steam? I can't read.
All yours.
This is tricky because the answer also changes. So even if you look this up on YouTube, I can guarantee you it's wrong because there's just been massive inflation, globally. So when we were talking with publishers and scouts not too long ago, they're like, "Yep, definitely $15 US price point. That's where you should be aiming Mooncorp." We messaged some of our contacts again recently, and they're like, $20. Yep, our game hasn't changed. So just inflation goes up. It can be quite tricky to figure out where and how the value is. I talked about this recently at a Games Plus Rush Hour event as well, where there's some people will end up buying your game, no matter what, because it's the type of game that it is. And if there's a lot of those people, you can usually justify quite a high price, and it can be more worthwhile than going for a much lower price. But if you've got a large general audience, it can be advantageous to drop it a lot, sometimes even below the $10 mark, where people go, oh, that's not much, I'll definitely buy that. It doesn't have to be on sale straight away. So it can be quite tricky, and one of the quickest ways to ask that is just how much content is there in it. So if you play a game for less than 2.5 hours on Steam and you finish the game, you can actually refund it and get all of your money back, no questions asked. If you can play it faster than 2.5 hours. So most games have to be over 2.5 hours. So let's say you have a 3-4 hour game, you're probably looking at the $5 to $10 mark. If it's around the 20 to 30 hours, you might be able to do the $10 to $15. And sometimes it's not just based on time, it's based on the kind of experience or the art. Art is usually a big one, where if you've got a realistic looking game, that's where the AAA games start paying for $100 with hundreds of hours of content. So you just need to, again, it comes back to the research. Find games that are similar to yours, and then price it so that it's that it's competitive with your competitors. So if somebody else is buying something similar, yours should also be good value compared to it.
Yeah, I mean, you've got to be very careful when it comes to Steam as well. And one thing I'll say is, when you're selling your first game, people usually say that I'm an indie person selling my first game, what should I do? One thing I'll say is, don't start with Steam, start with itch. Put your game out on itch for free for a long time, get a lot of feedback, see how much people like it then. That's going to give you a really good feel. Then see where you go from there. Also, it's a case of, is this your very first game? Do you already have other games out there? Do you have an existing audience? Do you have it built up? But the one thing I'd say to be really careful with Steam is don't start too low, because you can go down, but you cannot go back up. So if you start out with a game on $5 in Steam, you can't turn around 2 years later and start trying to sell people for $20. You just can't do it. So you just have to really have that mindset. Exactly, yeah. So it's much easier to start out with like $30 and then you do a heavy discount, see how that goes. You might reduce it over time. But like I said, you can't start that game out at $5 and then charge $20 for it a year later.
But in your case, Shannon, so how do you determine where to position your price given the competition in the area? So how do you decide to go whether to go above or below your competitors?
Yeah, so look, I mean, our one was, like I said, was relatively easy because there's an existing market with very existing set rates. So like I said, I just did that spreadsheet of those dozen or so people, and we figured out, do we want to be in the top end, the middle end, or the bottom end? Ultimately, we decided to go nearer towards the bottom end, but again, it's on a percentage basis, so it's not the variations you're talking about, percentages, very small percentages. But the reason for that is we are coming in later to the game, and we were coming in with a single product. So we basically at that point decided that that's why we wanted to start at that lower end as opposed to the medium or higher end.
Okay, great. Okay.
Anyone else? Do you find pitching VR titles more difficult than other types of games? If so, is this something that's increasing in demand? From Luke.
Depends what you're saying. When you're talking about pitching VR titles, I suppose the difficulty with me is I'm not pitching to customers. So I'm pitching to businesses. I'm pitching to business owners. So they're the ones that will then be responsible to on-selling to customers. But I think more broadly, I mean, one thing I will say is that we did start our journey a long time ago. I started this out well over 10 years ago when I looked a little bit more like Saxon than I do now. I think I'm the version of Saxon 15 years on when he's a lot more tired. But basically, and back in those days, we were actually one of the first adopters of VR. We were one of the early access titles. We were one of the Steam launch titles for HTC Vive. And back then, it was an absolute nightmare. We lost a ridiculous amount of money despite being asked to come and showcase over at GDC and 100 plus positive reviews, all that sort of stuff, because at that stage, VR was very much in its infancy, very early in the stage. It was extraordinarily hard to make people understand what VR was about. I would much prefer to be a VR developer now. I think now is actually a very good time to be getting into it. I think there's a very different use case of VR now. It's more understood. It's adopted a lot wiser. There's a lot better standalone systems such as the Quest and stuff like that. It is a lot easier to get into that market. The big difficulty you always have in VR is, however, the marketing. How do you make people understand what they're going to be seeing in game? How do you make them understand that experiential nature of it? You need to have a really good understanding of how to create mixed reality videos, for example, showing people the real life and then showing them in game. It is a very different skill set to your standard sort of, animator or whatever it might be that creates your trailer videos. So that's a really important thing to know about. But also it's about how do you advertise to that market in terms of what experience they're getting after. So long story short, it is trickier, but it's easier now than it once was.
Again, if I can just ask you a follow-up question, because what you're saying also relates to other industries. If you're trying to sell something that the market doesn't actually know it needs or isn't ready for yet, what are some of the tricks that you use to get them to understand the value of what you're offering?
Look, I suppose you've got to try and, if it's something that's new to market, you've got to try and push it and relate it back to something they do understand. So, for example, if you're talking about sort of some immersive technology, something that's new that's come out, how do you make them understand that? It's like having a TV wrapped around your entire head. How can you sort of try and relate that back to something they currently do, they currently understand, but explain it in a way around how the current tech works or the future tech works? Because that is sometimes the tricky bit. So that's sort of broadly the way we've done it.
Okay, great. Okay. Another question? Think of it, that was a long one.
How much does release period make a difference in your opinion? And what kind of research do you need to do to determine what is a good, can't see the rest
Thing, maybe?
good thing from Baz?
I'm assuming time. I'm assuming that must be time, a good time.
It's time. Yeah, that's it.
Sorry, Baz.
Let's have a go at that one.
I can try and answer
I mean,
that one.
I'll leave it to Saxon. Yeah, I was about to say that relates more to Saxon, I think, than us. We don't really look at release type windows like that.
Yeah, for release windows, it's figuring out what you want from your release window as well. So particularly for games on Steam, which is quite common at the moment, it's releasing a game even before it's finished, which is usually referred to as early access. And for a lot of
Worst thing ever.
And it's interesting, yeah, some communities absolutely hate it, so you need to make sure that first your community will be interested in it, and then also what you want out of it and how long that should be. So there are some games that are perpetually in early access for years at a time, and like they're finished. They're just full service games, and they keep on rolling and updating. The main time that a release window like early access is quite good is when you've got a community where there's some people that really want to be involved with the development and the updates, and others who are really keen to see it be 100% completed. So there's a lot of people where when you do early access builds, they love finding all the problems with it, giving you feedback, telling you how you can change it. And then when you go to a released state, there's a whole lot of people that have been waiting and watching and go, yep, all right, everyone thinks, it's really good. Version 1.0 is released, and I would love to play the finished version of it. So that's kind of the best case scenario for that. And then just making sure that it's in a good time where your marketing and your audience want to play it, I think is the best way to try and formulate it. And usually there's somebody that knows what that should be much better than you. Even Steam say this. They say, please message us for your release window, because you can set it yourself, but we can also tell you what else is releasing on that day, and they've got a much better idea of when to release it, usually when you do. And then some people in the publishing and marketing industry have an even better idea than them. So definitely do the research, talk to people to try and figure out when your release window should be.
And look, one thing I will say that's interesting. Sorry, I was just going to say, the one thing that's interesting about early access in terms of how that works with Steam at the moment, it's actually one of the few times when you can break the rule around pricing. In early access, you do have the opportunity to offer your game at a lower price, stating that it is in early access, especially if it's in a more broken state. That's how you can be reflective with your pricing, saying it's in early access, we're offering lower pricing, and being very transparent around this is our alpha, beta, very early access period. When it goes live, it's going to cost X, and that's how you sort of get people buy-in that way. So it is a quite unique thing in the way they've done early access has really changed over time.
Do you think that actually also gives you some valuable feedback about your pricing? So if you're doing early access and you're getting, whatever the feedback is, it might cause you to change your pricing strategy down the track? Yep, I see you nodding.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
In terms of what its value is now and what its value will be in the future. So sometimes there can be, extra things, whether that's downloadable content or expansions on top of that. That's something that people can be quite interested in. And sometimes if it is, too expensive in that early access period, it can definitely be worth revising what your final release price should be.
Again, if you take that and expand it to like the general IT, like you talk about e-commerce platforms and releasing products on platforms, there's always that view that you can't release it till it's perfect. What's your view on that?
No, not at all. And look, that is actually, it's in a similar sense. We've done things where we've gotten early access beta champions of our products and basically said, look, I'm going to offer it to you for a very discounted price or a very cheap price because you're one of the first people on board and we want to work with you to refine and get this product great. And that's worked wonders for us. They're happy because they're still getting what's a decent product at a very cheap price. They get to guide the development and process of that. They feel like they're being a part of it. And that way they feel that they're getting really great value for their product once it actually does get to that final state and they have to start paying that full price.
Sometimes it's the Sometimes it's the exclusivity as well. So I'm definitely interested to see what Shannon has to say about this. But Apple's done it with their new virtual reality headset, where it's a very, very premium product. It's going to be very low in numbers on release, but there's nothing else like it. And if you're interested in it, you get access to that exclusive experience. But it is very much it's not a final product, but it's something that developers are interested in, and that consumers that want to be on the bleeding edge of what's new are interested in.
And isn't that a little bit of psychographic profiling, essentially, that you are creating something for the early adopters, and they are almost a market in themselves? And whether it's an earlier release or an exclusive or be involved in creating my product, that is a specific mindset, and they're almost a market that you can market to directly, which is quite different from your final release product.
Yeah, definitely.
Do you consciously cater to those two different audiences in terms of what you do?
Yeah, absolutely. And those are usually the ones that turn into my champions, which is the thing I was talking about earlier, is that they're the ones that, they're the ones that turn into your streamers or whatever it might be. They're the ones that are just really passionate about this stuff, really interested. They want to be involved as early as they can. They want to feel like they're part of that journey and part of that process as opposed to just another customer. And they are amazing people, and you want to try and get as much of them on board as possible, because they're the ones that end up making your product better and selling your product for you, so you don't have to do it yourself.
Yeah. Okay. Another question. Do's and don'ts in regards to pitching a potential project, from Catherine. You want to say
best thing I'd say with pitching is make sure you've thought of all of the best things you can show about your project, and be very upfront about what the risks or problems with it are and how you're going to address them or have already addressed them. Depending on what kind of business project or multimedia project or game that it is, definitely figuring that out and being upfront about it, and just with practicing and pitching in general, practice it in front of people, make sure that any feedback that they have you've addressed, and that it's to the right target audience as well. So if you know that in advance, you can adjust accordingly to figure out how to change your pitch for your project.
I mean, there's some pretty standard tricks to pitching. I mean, I think we've spoken to you about this over the years, Saxon, is, know the story you're telling, and know your customer, and make sure that you explain why this is something that your customer wants and how you're going to access that customer. There's lots of tricks. There's also lots of workshops and things you can do around the place. I mean, AIE runs really cool pitching workshops quite regularly. So, just get involved and give it a go.
Yeah, and actually know what you want to get out of the pitch. It's amazing how often I see people that know that they should do a pitch of some sort, but they actually know what they want to get out. What's the pain point or solution you're trying to achieve? Do you need X amount of money for X amount of growth, for X amount of equity, or are you just doing this really to practice your pitching skills, or are you doing this just because you need X amount of new customers to get your revenue to X point? Like, so many of the times I get people perfect their pitch without sort of realizing, what do I want to get out of it if this pitch goes well? So that's a really important thing to do beforehand, is think about, why are you actually pitching? What is it you actually need to get out of this?
Exactly. You're not necessarily always pitching for money. You might be pitching for a specific skill set or a partner, or there's all different reasons why you will pitch. You're exactly right. Absolutely.
And certainly contacts. Sometimes with whether it's games, especially with serious games, it's looking for contacts within industries. So yeah, very often people get lost in the whole idea that you're pitching for money. So great question, Catherine.
Excellent.
And that's
Another
how
question?
we've picked up some projects as well as, pitching Mooncorp and then picking up serious games. So yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely.
Okay. On the subject of Steam, how many wish lists should we aim for? Is there a magic number?
I've been told there's a magic number, which is 10,000. But that's pretty generalized. If you're a one-person team, depending on the price of your small little game you've created yourself, maybe 1,000's enough. If you're a small indie team, maybe 10,000. If you've got 100,000 wish lists on Steam, I don't think you've got a problem at all. I think you'll be very successful. So it's somewhere in between there, but again, it depends on your project, how much money you want from it, or what your goal is on release. So if you're sometimes your goal is to create a much larger player base, or expand your influence as a company. That's definitely something we're looking at with Mooncorp in particular. Our goal isn't only money; it's where it sits in the market, how it can go across to different platforms as well as an entryway into those platforms. So but I have been told by people, if you've got about 10,000, that's pretty good.
Look, one thing I will say about wish lists is, because it's something that people don't do particularly well, track your conversions. Okay, have somewhere a big spreadsheet or whatever it might be of where your current wish list is. See how your conversions are going over time. Seeing if there's particular points where your conversions start upticking or downticking. So if you do a big promo or media campaign, for example, pushing XYZ aspect of your game, and all of a sudden your wish list numbers start converting like crazy, focus on that. So if you see you do a particular discount and your wish list start getting a lot of conversions, take that into account. So it's time and again I see that's something that people don't do with their wish lists. It's a very important metric and it's a very important tool. Make sure you are tracking it.
It's a lot of fun to do that as well. When we were doing marketing campaigns, we do new thing on Reddit, let's try this, and then we'd just watch the wish lists to see if they would, track up, sometimes track down. You don't want to, say something wrong on Reddit and everyone goes, I'm not interested in this game, and then unwish list it. But there's definitely some aspects that we showed of our game on Reddit and some other social media platforms, and then you see the wish lists immediately start, ticking up from when that's released. So it's a lot of fun to track it and see how your marketing campaign is affecting it.
And I think this raises that whole issue of what are you tracking across all of your marketing, and because what you measure and what you focus on are normally the things that you look to improve. So being very clear about what you're measuring, and as Shannon said, what are your conversions? You can do a lot of effort when it comes to marketing, and you can spend a lot of time and you can throw a lot of money at it, but you've got to know what you're measuring. Okay, any other questions? Oh, another one. How expensive is it typically to localize your product for different languages, and at what point does it become worth it?
We've done a lot of this recently, actually, and I spent a lot of money on this recently. Two things I would say is it's really cheap to do it really badly. The other thing is don't do it badly, because if you do it badly, you will burn a lot of your customer base and you'll annoy a lot of people. One thing they say is, especially with games and all this sort of stuff, don't localize until you've got a demand or a need for it. Okay, so I don't know exactly what the average is, but you can spend thousands and thousands, if not tens of thousands of dollars to do localization properly, depending on whether you're just talking about text, whether you're talking about narration. It can be all sorts of different ways. And you've got to make sure, do not just go to your friends that can speak XYZ language and get them to do it for you, because you will get it wrong unless they are a native fluent speaker. If you don't get the colloquialisms right, any of that sort of stuff, always try and get a proper company to do this for you. There's a lot of them out there, but try and make sure you do this properly, because if you talk about cultural stuff and cultural norms, this is one of the big ways people put others off is if they do their localization really badly. But what you will find is this is one of those stats you can track very easily on Steam. Where are you getting all your downloads? Where are you getting your interest? Thing that Saxon was mentioning before, where am I seeing big streamers, big numbers coming from? And that can justify very easily for you, okay, this is clearly where I need to spend some reasonable money here to make sure I'm supporting that fan base.
Interesting. Okay, another question. Okay, well, here we go. Okay, I've noticed that my short form videos for my game have only really reached Australians. Any tips to reach a more global audience? Oh, well. And this relates probably to things other than games as well. So
it's something we've been experimenting with in terms of short form videos. It might be more to do with where they're also being posted and shared. So you may get a whole lot of organic sharing because you know them, your friends know them, then your friends of friends know them. And if it's all within the Australian community, you'll probably get a lot of sharing there. If you've got short form videos that you think will reach another global audience, I'd say try and find that global audience, whether that's online in social media somewhere on Reddit, and then try, sharing them there. And particularly if your content, works well in a global audience as well. So if it's, pretty internationally English based, it should, work quite well, in America, UK, things like that, and figure out how to get into those those areas on social media where they're being shared there rather than just in local Australian forums.
yeah. Okay, I think we've got time for maybe one more question. Let's see what pops up. Okay, here you go.
What do you find is the best way to get your game idea across in a team environment? For example, pitching to your team versus pitching to the... I think Isaac, we need you to fill in the last bit.
Oh, yes, my mic was muted. First, pitching to the client.
There you go. Thank you.
I would say from that, when you're pitching to your client, your team has to be on board. So make sure that your team is on board with your idea before you pitch to your client. They definitely, come afterwards. To pitching to your team, that's something that we put a lot of effort into because some of our work is paid and some of it isn't. So if some of our work isn't paid, our team really needs to be on board with the idea to feel like the work that they're giving is valued and is worthwhile for their time. So finding out about your team is also really important. So one thing I particularly focus on, we've got a team of about 14. You talk to all of them, you figure out what they want out of a project, and then you can end up designing or changing a product around what your team is interested in. And it doesn't have to be because they're giving their time. It can also just be to do with their enthusiasm and how well they are at performing some of those tasks. So if everyone is enthused about a project to work on, if you can figure out the kind of game or project that your team is really interested in working on across a whole range of areas, it's something that can make a really good product just because it's in everyone's interests to make it or create it, and that enthusiasm can be quite infectious across the team when you've got people helping each other to reach a goal that they particularly want, even for their portfolio. There's one thing I always say in our team where we usually have a particular goal for the project we want to achieve, but that's not to say that if you have a particular interest that you would like to include in the project that isn't against the project goals, if you're volunteering your time for it, I'm not going to stop you. You can fit anything in there that works, but if it doesn't work, it might get cut. And I think that's something that's worked really well within our teams, and it keeps people enthusiastically contributing to make projects just absolutely amazing.
One thing I'll say about this is everyone has their own idea for a game. Often, everyone's really enthusiastic about it. That's why a lot of people get into game dev. Usually, what a lot of starting out companies suffer for is actually completing a game. It's actually getting something done. And look, one thing is that once a team, a company, whatever, has made a decision on a game or on an approach, you need to learn how to make sure everyone is fully on board. So I think that's what Saxon was talking a little bit earlier about and alluding to in terms of your contract work and whatever it might be, because you've got to learn how to get your product out there, and you need to learn the business side of things in terms of your product needs to get out there in a set time frame so you can start getting a return on that product so you can be sustainable and successful. And that is by far and away where most indie game companies fall over, is they spend so much time talking about cool ideas, about cool games, trying to do 3,000 different cool games. They don't actually learn how to get a game done in a time frame, and how to do all the rest of the bits once you've created the game to actually market, research it, sell it, and get enough of a return so you can create your next game. And that is where, quite honestly, 90% of indie game companies will never make it because of that reason.
Absolutely. Fail as fast as you can. If you can make a game small, short, and get it out, figure out everything you've done wrong, try it again and improve. Once you've done that a couple times, it's definitely a huge help to see the whole process from beginning to end.
Okay. I'm just conscious we are about to run out of time, but I'm going to ask one last question. And I'm going to ask it as the mother of two sons who've been keen gamers. What I often see when speaking to game dev companies is that they're very much focused on Steam and all of the usual channels. But what they don't focus on is the people in the periphery that are the influencers when it comes to actually buying games. There's a mum out there who wants to buy their kid a game, and there's no marketing done for that. What's your perspective on that? So Shannon, I know because we've got physical studios, that might be slightly different. But Saxon, where it's very much online, do you ever market to the people who are either influencers or who might be buying on behalf of somebody else?
You definitely have to consider that. So my co-founder Blaine, he's been working at EB Games for a long time. He meets many of the mothers that come in to purchase games for their children, and it's definitely something that you have to be aware of, especially if your target audience is that younger market, is that there's a pretty low chance that they're actually paying for it. So one of the things with that is you actually have two audiences there. One is the child, where you have to make a game that they're interested in, but you also have to market it to the parent to make sure that they think it's something worthwhile playing. Is it something? Education usually comes to mind, but sometimes it can be other things. Teamwork, themes, learning, and a lot of that, should be really fun and engaging. So there's definitely ways of approaching that where you can cater to both of those as an audience, and it's something you should definitely be aware of.
I think it's actually a really good point, because it is something we still actively have to do, because we are selling to businesses, but we're also selling to businesses with their customers in mind. And one of the things, for example, is in marketing materials and marketing words, thinking that the stuff we create for example, in VR arcades, a really big audience is kids and younger kids and kids parties. And you need to be aware that it is mums and dads that are looking at the marketing images that are going out there. So you do not want to create marketing images that are filled with blood and gore, because mums and dads aren't going to want their kids going to something filled with blood and gore. There was a recent example of another company trying to do what we do that just didn't think about it, and they were young kids, and they created a game where they used swear words to describe all their different guns and stuff like that. And people started out with the shitty gun or the crappy gun or whatever it might be, and they were getting a lot of pushback from owners and providers saying, you cannot do that. I've got mums and dads coming through, and they've got kids coming out saying, I got to play with the shitty gun or whatever it was today. So I think it is really something you have to be aware of, is what are your layers of customers? What are the layers of people that end up getting you that money? You know, it might start with, you know, Steam or with my business, but, you know, they are then getting their money from somewhere as well, whether it's mum or dad or customers or it might be. So you do need to think about those things a lot.
Fantastic. I mean, we could keep going forever, but I guess we're all going to get home and do other things. But look, just Shannon and Saxon, thank you so much for your time. It's been really interesting for me, because I don't know a lot about the game space, but a lot of what you've both talked about is relevant to so many other businesses, and it's quite interesting pulling it all out. But thank you so much for your time.
And thanks so much, Isaac and AIE, for hosting us this evening.
Absolutely. Good night,
Thanks
everybody.
so much. There were really good questions as well. So thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
See you both soon.
Thanks,
guys.